Okay, my name is Ron Carrico. It's January the 17th, 2018, and we're at the San Diego Air and Space Museum, and we're interviewing Dave Barnett, one of our volunteers here at the museum who flew F-100s. And so to start off with, where were you born?
Good morning, Ron. Dave Barnett, born in Temecula, actually. I grew up in that area, third generation California.
No kidding. What did your parents do?
My father worked at a health resort called Marietta Hot Springs, owned by the Gunther family. He worked nearly his whole life there. So I went to grammar school in Temecula, and then moved out to Marietta Hot Springs where my dad worked, and it was kind of a neat experience. He started out working in the front office there, and then he ended up being the general manager there after about 35 years. I think it was there nearly 40 years. So it was a neat place to grow up.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1938.
So 38, well, you're 3 years older than I am.
Okay, very good.
So you got into aviation. Why and how?
Okay, after grammar school in Temecula, I went to Elsinore High School. It was the only high school in the whole valley at that time. Changed a lot over the years by now. And then from there I went up to Fresno State, earned a degree, a bachelor's degree, or actually in industrial engineering. Graduated from Fresno State in 1961. About that time the Vietnam War was starting to come up, and so I decided to interview both the Navy and the Air Force about what programs they had. The Air Force had something called Officer Training School, which I signed up for. They sent me down to Lakenheath Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, and after 3 months down there, I was commissioned as second lieutenant, and that was in September 1961. And during that time, they asked me if I'd like to get in, I was qualified physically to be a pilot. Had never flown in my life, but I said, well, that sounds great. So I decided to sign up to go to pilot training after officer training school.
Which base did you go to?
They assigned me to Big Spring, Texas, Webb Air Force Base. It had been a navigator training school, I think, during World War II. But then it was converted to one of the primary pilot training bases. I was fortunate enough to fly both the T-37, a little two-seat side-by-side trainer initially, and then the second phase we moved into the T-38, which was brand new at that time. We were very fortunate. That was the only base at that time that had the T-38, a two-seat tandem trainer. Could easily go supersonic, and was just a great airplane to learn to fly, and a great transition into the F-100.
So, what class were you?
I was in class 63 Delta. Actually, we spent more than a year, a little over a year, getting through pilot training because the the T-38 had some fuel control problems shortly after we got it, and so we actually had about 6 weeks where we didn't fly at all. But once they got those straightened out, it worked out fine, and so we were actually delayed in graduating a little bit longer than normal.
So you were selected for the F-100, or you were selected for fighters. Do you know why you were selected for fighters as opposed to transports?
Well, usually when the assignments came down from the pilot training class, obviously we had a priority system of how well you did during your pilot training days, and I was fortunate enough to be high enough. They had mostly F-100s and F-105s were the choices at that time, and I selected the F-100 and thoroughly enjoyed my choice.
So now you flew the F-100 your entire career.
Right, that was mine airplane to fly. Went to Luke Air Force Base in '63. I think there was about a 7 or 8 month course, learning to fly the F-100, learning to after learning the basic skills of flying 100, then learning the gunnery skills. Had 4 20-meter guns in it, and of course it could drop bombs and rockets, and also learned air refueling and navigation, low altitude navigation, that type of thing. So it was a great airplane.
So specifically, let's talk about individual things. Now, transitioning into it, what is it like to fly compared to a T-38?
Well, the T-38, like I said, was a great preparation for going to the 100. There were a lot of similarities. They could both. The F-100 is known as to being the first operation airplane that could go supersonic. So we did fly go supersonic in the F-100, my first flight or two. But after that, realistically, a supersonic flight was not very realistic in actual combat situations. So I don't think we hardly ever went supersonic again, but it was an easy transition from the T-38 to the F-100.
Did you do air-to-air combat with the F-100?
Yes, we did. I think later on, we didn't do much of that actually at Luke, but once I did assigned to operational bases both in Homestead, Florida, and later on in Lakenheath, England, we certainly did do quite a bit of air-to-air combat training.
Well, let's talk about the ground attack, because that's probably what F-100s are most famous for, is a ground attack.
I think that's very true. I mean, we did do some air-to-air training, but the bulk of our training was to learn to strafe with our 20mm guns, drop bombs, both high angle and low angle bombing, and shoot rockets.
Okay, I flew the F-4. So what we did typically was, when you go to the range, we'd drop a nuke, or what we usually have, 2 nuke attacks. One a lay-down type one, and one would be a LAD maneuver. But in the F-100, they did a different maneuver.
Well, right. We had both of those. We had a lay-down, a LAD, and then we had what we called an over-the-shoulder, where you basically flew right over the target, and then you did a loop, and the weapon came off as you were in your ascent, and then you went back, did an emblem maneuver at the top, and then flew back to escape. So, actually, my training in the F-100 was both for conventional, for dropping bombs and shooting the guns, and then also for dropping nuclear weapons, which we did shoot nuclear alert several times during my career.
So describe for me again the over-the-shoulder. What you said, were you pulling up vertically and then releasing the weapon?
Right. You basically come right over the target, then you pull up vertically at about a 4G pull, basically just doing a loop, and the system in the aircraft is designed to actually automatically release the weapon at a certain point as you're going up over the shoulder, and then it continues up as you go back over the shoulder, and then it would come back down, hopefully fairly near where your aiming point is.
Do you remember what the weapon was?
The Mark 28 is one of the early ones I remember. I know there were several others after that we learned and did carry or set alert with. I know they went through several iterations during my career flying the 100.
Yeah, we used the same thing in the F-4. So, but we never did that over the shoulder.
You never did that, huh?
No, we did the LAD maneuver. We pull a 45, release it, roll upside down, and pull down. Okay. And then, boogie on down the road as fast as you could go.
Yeah, I remember at Wheelus we had a dummy 2,000 pound dummy that we practiced with, and when that came off as you were going over your loop, you could definitely feel a pretty good jolt as you let go of that baby going over the top.
We call it the shape. Remember, it was blue.
Yeah.
So now the next thing you would be practicing, let's see, as I recall, we would go and usually do simulated skip bomb type thing, a napalm.
Right. Yeah.
And I think our pod held six bombs. And so we would do 2 nukes and then 2 laydowns and then 2 dive bombs. And usually 45-degree dive is what we did.
Yeah, I think we did both 45-degree and 30-degree dive was I think our normal dive angles that we practiced quite a bit, right.
So what was let's just talk about speeds a little bit. What kind of if you're on a low-level navigation mission, simulated combat mission, what do you recall what the airspeed was you used?
Usually right at 400, I think was pretty much typical of what we tried to keep a speed at.
And then run in?
And then if you were doing a bomb run-in, I think for over the shoulder, whatever, we tried to get up to 500 knots. That was our normal run-in speed for nuclear weapon delivery.
And the F-4 we used 420 and 540.
Did you?
From the IP on it. And it would get to 540.
Just like that. Yeah.
Unbelievable how fast that thing was. Okay, so your first duty assignment then out of Luke was?
Homestead, Florida. 31st TAC Fighter Wing, assigned to the 306 TAC Fighter Squadron. That was in '64 when I joined down there. they tried to get me, they wanted to get me combat ready as soon as possible because they were starting to deploy to Turkey. One of the squadrons, the head of the 308 squadron, actually flew F-100s on a very long deployment from all the way from Princeton, Florida to Chile, Turkey, right near Izmir. And they were there about 3 months, and then the 306 went over and replaced them.
It was Incirlik, Turkey?
Right. Not Incirlik. This was Izmir. It's on the western coast of Turkey. Incirlik is another one of the main bases there in Turkey. I know that we had a
what was the living conditions like? Was it an Air Force base, or what was it?
It was basically a Turkish base, but we had Air Force facilities there, and I think this was an earlier time when they set up to have, our main purpose over there was to set nuclear alert. We had our 4 airplanes that we would set nuclear alert on while we were over there, and we would also, they had a bombing range called Konya, I believe it was, that we would actually go. It was not a controlled range, it was just some targets on the ground that we could go drop some bombs on and practice a bit. So that, it was not near as good a training as we had when we went down to Wheelus. That was the other main place that we did most of our training at.
Did they have a range officer out there then?
Not at Konya, no. It was just, you just controlled yourself when you went out to the range. Okay. But of course at Wheelus I was a range officer, very well controlled.
How many times did you go to Wheelus?
Oh gee, well I was at Lakenheath, well when I talk about Wheelus now I got to talk about my second, yeah, but let's back up chronology a little bit. Okay. I was at Homestead, Florida for a while. There we only went to Turkey and back.
Okay, you were talking about Turkey. Now, was there an actual base there, or did you live on the economy?
No, there was an actual base there. We had, it was actually a Turkish base, but excuse me, sorry. We had our squadrons there, and they, so we basically had the base ourselves, but there was a Turkish presence there. But it was there, and we were mainly in supporting the nuclear war at that time, the Cold War effort.
What kind of, do you remember what the targets were? Kind of targets, I should say.
It's a little fuzzy there. I don't remember specifically. I think most of them were either military, or we thought they were doing military targets of whether it was weapons that they were building or tanks and that type of thing. I think there were some airfields that we had targeted, as best as my recollection.
The targets I recall, and you know, we flew in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Those were the areas, and I've from coming up from Turkey, we're probably into Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan and places like that.
I think so. Of course, we also said nuclear alert when we were in Aviano, Italy, and then we were back home in Homestead, Florida when I was over there later. But the first time I was over there was just TDY when I was from Homestead. So
what do they call the alert?
I call it Victor Alert.
Yeah.
All right. Basically, 15 minutes. We set, you know, the airplanes were cocked and ready to go, and we had facilities there where we had 4 lines, so 4 of us on alert. Usually, three-day shifts. We'd rotate every 3 days.
Yeah, we did the same thing. So, how long were you in Turkey then?
Well, we were supposed to be there about 3 months, but as things happened at that time, the Vietnam War started heating up, and one of the first squadrons to go over there was the 307th, which was out of back at Homestead. So instead of replacing us in Turkey, they went to Vietnam. So our 306 squadron ended up being over there, I think, close to 5 or 6 months before they finally got a squadron replaces over there.
So what year would that be?
That would be in late '64. I was there from, I think, May of '64 to like October '64.
And then did you go directly to Vietnam then?
Then I came back to Homestead. Actually had a short stint going to something called Squadron Officer School up at Maxwell. And then I came back, and they were sending a lot of people TDY to Vietnam at that time, but then they came down and decided it was time to send people, actually PCFs, permanent change of station. So I received an assignment to go to Korat, Thailand. I went over there in October of October '65. And even though I had F-100 experience, they signed me to the command post, which was okay at that time. So obviously it was not a flying assignment, but I was a first lieutenant at that time. I worked in the command post in Karat. I was there for a year, and this was during the time of Rolling Thunder. And
So what year would that be?
Well, that started in 65 to 66. I was there just for a year. So, of course, Rolling Thunder started that time and continued on after I was gone. But again, that's when we had the F-4s, the 105s flying out of both Karat and Tok Lee into North Vietnam. And they also, interesting thing related to the F-100 is they had the first Wild Weasel program. They had 6 F-100Fs that were modified to go after the SAM sites over there. They developed a Shrike missile, which would actually, the idea was to hone in on the radar signal from the SAM sites and then destroy them that way. So,
who was in the back seat there?
they had the weapon system officers, so it was electronic warfare officers. They had a special group. I think Gary Willard was the head of the group. They brought 6 airplanes over to Karat. Happened to be there in the time I was there. But of course I couldn't fly with them because even though I had flown the F-100, these guys had very special training down at Eglin. They had a pilot in the front seat, obviously, and an electronic warfare officer in the back seat to control the raw equipment that was installed in the F-100Fs.
Where were they flying out of?
They were flying out of Karat, and they would escort. They would be the lead aircraft, or they would lead a flight of 4 F-105s into North Vietnam, and then they would try to seek out any of the SAM sites, destroy the SAM sites, and then the F-100s could go ahead and bomb their targets.
So since you were working in the command post, were you getting the feedback about how well these things were working?
Yes, we certainly were. We basically controlled. We got the flag orders out of Saigon every day for the missions that the 105s, F-4s were going to fly in North Vietnam, and the Wild Weasel ones were also there. And so we certainly got immediate feedback on how the missions went that day. We reported that back to Saigon. Unfortunately, there was a lot of 105s that were lost during that time period over there because there was a very heavy anti-aircraft threat in North Vietnam, and of course the SA-2s came in at that time, and of course the MiGs were there also. So it was a very tough environment to fly in.
Did the F-100s ever engage in MiGs, do you know?
To the best of my knowledge, the F-100s were only deployed in South Vietnam, so there was hardly ever any engagements with MiGs. The MiGs pretty much stayed in North Vietnam and only engaged the 105s and F-4s. There's one case I know that they told Captain Kilness, I believe was his name, that did claim that he did, because the F-100s did go into the southern part of North Vietnam during the early part of the war. And so there was one case where he did think it was never substantiated, but he did think he shot down a MiG-17. But that's the only possible MiG engagement I'm aware of as far as the F-100. All the other engagements with the MiGs are certainly with the F-4s and F-105s.
Yeah, one of the commanders I had shot down a MiG with a 105. He said he pulled off the target and the guns were armed and it was right there. He pulled the trigger and it blew up. Just a matter of a miracle, you know.
But basically, even though my assignments, I never did actually fly the F-100 in combat myself. I knew many guys that did though, but the F-100 was pretty much exclusively used in South Vietnam, dropping napalm bombs, guns, and that type of thing for close air support. I guess the timing, the way it worked out, so I spent a year working in the command post at Karat. Then when I finished that, I asked for an assignment back to the F-100. So I had a concurrent assignment to Lakenheath, England at that time. So I was really out of country for 4 years, a year in Karat, and then I was in Lakenheath, England, the 40th Attack Fighter Wing. I was assigned to the 493rd Attack Fighter Squadron, again there from October of '66 to October of '69. So that's when I really did a lot of my best F-100 flying, because there we had 3 squadrons. We had the 492nd, the 493rd, the 494th, and we basically rotated around. One squadron was always gone. We'd be gone a month at a time. We'd usually spend 2 weeks down at Wheelus for gunnery training, and then we'd spend the other 2 weeks either at Aviano, Italy, or back to Izmir, Turkey, or Chile as we called the base.
Well, 1 out of 3 isn't bad.
Yeah.
Aviano.
Right. So for 3 years, that was basically what I did. We spent a lot of time TDY rotating between those bases. We had a base. We did have a range in England where we could do some gunnery training, but it was with the weather and the conditions. It was a lot more efficient to go down to Wheelus and do a lot of our serious gunnery training down there. And there again, we did both the conventional training and the nuke training, since the F-100 did both roles during that time.
What did you think of Wheelus?
Oh, it was a cool place. I think it was a good time to go down there. It was a great place. The weather was always good, and you felt like you really got some good training and good camaraderie. You met guys from other bases down there at the same time, so it was a fun time down there.
And a huge bar too.
Oh yeah, big bar.
The bar was so big. It was
nice beaches down there too. So it was. I do remember being there during the 6-day war, which took place for.
Wait, I was there at the same time.
Were you there? Okay, well, very good. So I think we kind of sat down. We didn't really know what to do. I think we sat there for a couple of days. They had an F-100 to kind of armed up, but we never know what was going to happen. And then I think we eventually deployed back to Lakenheath.
Yeah, I always used to get a kick out of you'd see the Libyan Air Force fly around.
Yes.
In their T-birds, and I always just get a kick out of it because they never left the pattern.
Yeah,
they'd fly around with the gear down all the time, Just
yeah, I guess so. Sure.
I thought that was.
Yeah.
I thought that was really unusual. So.
Yeah.
And then my wife has a recipe for an Aviano that I picked up at one of those restaurants that she makes every now and then.
Yeah, we always had good eating, and we got to Aviano, so good Italian places to go. That's for sure. A lot of good wine.
For sure. So so you were at Lakenheath from when to when?
Okay, so I was there from 1966 to 1969, just exactly right 3 years, and then I came back to the States, and I was actually, so there again, since my DROS or time for overseas, I wasn't going to step back to Thailand. So that's another reason I never really got in the air war in Vietnam. But my next assignment was Reese Air Force Base, Lubbock, Texas. I was assigned to the head of the little test group, even though it was a pilot training base, but we had a small little test group that would fly the airplanes on test stops after they had maintenance for them before we turned them back over to the students to fly. So I had a bit more time in the T-37 and T-38 during that time. And that was 69 to 71. My next assignment, I applied to AVID, which is Armed Forces Institute of Technology out of Wright-Patt. But they had programs at different schools around the country, so I received an assignment to get an MBA degree at SMU in Dallas, Texas. So it was pretty cool. It was just a one-year program. I graduated in the end of '72. I think it was at the end of the school year. I think it was April or May of '72. But I'd been there just a year, and I got an MBA degree, which was a good thing.
So did you stay 20 years in the Air Force then?
Yeah, I sure did. Anyway, after I got my MBA degree, then it was time to go back to Vietnam again, or Thailand, I should say, the Vietnam War. I spent 22 years in the Air Force overall. So after I had my MBA degree, then it was time to go back to Thailand. But instead of sending me again back to the F-100 unit, they sent me back to Udon, Thailand this time, and this was in '72. I was there again for another year. It was a one-year assignment from October '72 to October '73, and that's when we were right during the end of the war. So I worked for something called 13th Advon. General Hughes was the head of our 1-star up at Udon. And there again, it was not a flying assignment for me. I was on his staff, and we coordinated a lot of the efforts for the linebacker at that time, linebacker 1, and then became later linebacker 2. So it was again an interesting assignment. I coordinated a lot of the F-111s were flying out of Togli at that time. We set up little remote battery beacon systems in Laos for them to bomb off of. So if they would go into North Vietnam on their primary mission, they couldn't find their target wherever they come back to Laos, and we always had backup targets for them there. We also coordinated a lot of the gunships, the M130s and also the C-47s for a lot of the road traffic on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a lot of the truck traffic. So it was an interesting time, and of course there was there during the end of the war when Nixon finally authorized the use of the B-52s in the Linebacker 2 effort that did eventually bring the end to the war. So we coordinated the end of war activities, and then we still had aircraft there in Thailand, and we didn't really know what to do when the war was over, so we actually set up some training places in Thailand. So until everybody was withdrawn out of there, I coordinated some of the training bases they had in Thailand. So it was an interesting year, 2 different years in supporting the Vietnam War, but both of them in Thailand.
So what were they? So they were training people to fly the American airplanes that were left behind?
No, we were still just training our own people. We still had our own people there at Udorn and Kura before we withdrew all the airplanes, and they just wanted to have some place to fly. So we set up a little training base. I can't remember the name of the base, but Thailand did have a gunnery range there that we could do some training flights in. And then shortly after that, shortly after I left, I know in September of '73, I believe it was, you know, everybody was pretty well pulled out of there.
Huh. That was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was amazing. But the good news from my standpoint was I got back in the F-100 after that. After I left Udorn, they assigned me to a 9th Air Force IG team in Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, right outside of Sumter, a good base. And our mission there was to do little mini ORIs, if you will, operational inspections of the Guard and Reserve units. We basically covered the eastern part of the United States. Bergstrom Air Force Base had a similar ORI team that did the Guard and Reserve units in the western part of the United States. But it was really cool. I got back to, and the reason they assigned me there is because of my F-100 experience. And of course, all the F-100s pretty much were the Guard and Reserve units at that time. So I had a good buddy I went to pilot training with by the name of Ron Byers. And he was the DO at, I'll think of it in a minute here, in Indiana, at Terre Haute, Indiana, I'm sorry. Anyway, I said I need to get current back in the F-100, so he said, sure, coming up, and so I got to go know the guys there at Terre Haute real well, and flew with them quite a bit, and then for about 2.5 years, I did inspections of Guard and Reserve units, primarily the ones that flew the F-100. I would fly with their guys, and it was a great bunch of guys to fly. Most of them were airline pilot guys that were in the Guard or Reserve, and so I got to fly some of their. We went to F-105 guys units also, and we had some of them also. I'm trying to remember what other planes. I think one of them had a T-37s they flew, and some O2s. But they're quite a mixture of airplanes. But of course, I enjoyed mostly flying with the F-100 units.
So, for a real offhand thought here, the maintenance of the active duty F-100s versus the Guard and Reserve F-100s, what would you think? How would you compare the two?
Good question. I guess I don't know of any real difference. I think the Guard and Reserve units, you had a lot more stability in the Guard. I mean, those maintenance guys, they worked there for the same airplane for many years. So I think in some respects, even though the airplanes were older by the time they got to the Guard, they were certainly well maintained, and I don't ever remember having any problems with any of the airplanes I flew with the Guard and Reserve units.
I was in the reserves for a long time, and it was the 130s in the reserves, and we had, every time we'd go any place to support an active duty unit, we'd always be using our airplanes because theirs were broken.
Yeah.
And you'd get in one of theirs and they were dirty and grungy inside,
Yeah.
and ours were just pristine. And
yeah, I think the Guard guys took a great pride in keeping their airplanes in good flying shape, and
well, they've been working on it for 20 odd years.
yeah,
It's pretty
I
easy.
think my last flight in the F-100 was in June of 1976. Jack Dobb, who was the air advisor at Terre Haute, flew me from Terre Haute back to Shaw, and that was my last flight in the F-100, or my last flight at all in the F-100. I never did fly any more after that. That was the only airplane I really flew outside the T-37, T-38.
I was born in Terre Haute, actually.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
I remember driving by the base and seeing the F-100s there.
Yeah, okay, oh yeah, they were
But, you know, I've been out
good
here
at there.
forever, so. Yeah, it's the first time I've heard anybody say the word Terre Haute in a long time.
Okay.
2 words, actually. Well, so, what do you know, now the F-100, when you flew them, most of the time they had tanks on them. Was there a big performance difference between an F-100 with tanks and without tanks?
Well, you're right. Certainly our normal configuration was to fly with the 335 gallon tanks, mainly for, you know, to give us a little more effort to travel further. They also had the bigger ones called 450, which were not very aerodynamic at all. We used those a few times when we fly from Lakenheath all the way down to Wheelus, because it was a kind of touch and go whether we could make it without going into Aviano on the way or not. But you're right, the 335 gallon tanks were the main ones that they used most of the time. Of course, flying the airplane cleaner was a lot more maneuverable, but of course a lot shorter range.
So what do you think would be the comparison between a clean T-30, a 38, T-38 and an F-100 clean?
I think fairly comparable there, certainly. I think the T-38 was actually even a little sleeker airplane and a little later design, certainly. So, you know, and then they used the T-38, I think, as one of the aggressor squadrons out of Nellis there for red flag training later. So it was a good airplane to use from that standpoint.
Still using them.
Yeah, I guess they are.
We went for the 50th anniversary of graduated from pilot training last year.
Cool.
And they still had some flying.
Right.
They said there were 35 left out of 1,000 that they'd started with.
And of course, I know the astronauts used the T-38 flying back and forth between Texas and down to the Cape.
Al Worden told me that they had, who was on Apollo 15.
Right.
He said anywhere you went, you always had a T-38 within an hour.
Right. Yeah.
You'd make a call an hour later.
Yeah.
So you sat a lot of nuclear alert.
Sure did, yeah. You know, both Lakenheath and Aviano Italy and Turkey. So yeah.
That was just so boring.
Well, yeah. Actually, we actually had we could actually go out and play golf at Lakenheath. We had a little 9-hole course where we set up right next to where our work facility was.
Cool.
So we could do that. And a lot of times we could actually go on base. I think they relaxed the 15-minute alert sometimes. So we could actually go on base and go shopping or go to the movie.
And once you finally got the radios, we could walk around.
Right.
Yeah.
So it did give us some flexibility. It should.
Have you gone back to Lakenheath?
Excuse me?
Did you ever go back to Lakenheath?
No, I didn't. Not military. I did go back. I did go back to England and visit some friends I met over there, but I never did go back to the military bases over there. No.
Yeah, so you were able to fly the T-37 and the T-38 at the same time just to do test hops.
Right, yeah.
That must have been kind of fun.
Yeah, it was. That was kind of a fun time. I can do 4 or 5 flights a day sometimes. You go up for about a half hour just to make sure everything's working okay, depending on whether it was an engine change or they did something to the wings or whatever. We'd usually go through and T-38, we'd actually shut down an engine if it had been an engine change and then restart it in the air and that type of thing. But it could fly just fine on one engine, and T-37 could too. But it was fun flying, just flying those airplanes, and again, never really had any serious problems with any of them. One time I think one of the T-38, the engine didn't relight, but again, no problem flying it on one engine, that's for sure. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my flying in the military, the F-100 and so forth. But once I retired, I never did get back into flying. I've enjoyed aviation, but I never did actually pursue flying career anymore.
Well, it's no fun when you have to pay to do it.
That's true.
That's exactly how I look at it. But besides, something you want to talk about?
Well, I just finished up my military career real quick. I had a couple of more good assignments. I went to Wright-Patterson. Again, my MBA degree helped me out there. I got into the acquisition business at Wright-Patterson. I worked in the electronic warfare program office, and we coordinated or ran a lot of the programs for electronic warfare systems coming into the Air Force. So I spent there about 4 years until 1980, and then my last assignment was on the Air Force IG team out of Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino. And again, a neat assignment. we think of the Air Force IG as going out and doing ORIs and that type of thing, but we had a team that they called the System Acquisition Management Inspection Teams. And we basically inspected new systems coming into the Air Force. What was the need? Was it going to cost? Was it going to be cost effective? Did the Air Force really need it? And that type of thing. A couple of them that I was involved in, one was called, one we did on special operations. I know some of the new systems coming in. We went down to England, went back to the Pentagon, and discussing some of the new special operations systems were coming into the Air Force. Another one was called Glickam and Ground Launched Cruise Missile, which were again was an idea of a nuclear weapon being launched from the back of a big truck, basically, and we were going to deploy this in Europe. We took trips over to Belgium, I know, and to Green and Common in England. Again, that was canceled later, I think, by Reagan. But again, it was an interesting assignment. The Air Force IG team. I was back in California, kind of back home again, so it was a good time to retire after 22 years. I stayed back in California. I was able to get after a few months of retirement life, I moved down to San Diego. I got a position with, we used to be called L'Oreal at that time, later became L3 Communications. As a program manager, again, we worked on systems related to telemetry system, mostly for satellites and missiles and that type of thing. So a good another 20-year career after my military career. But I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. Interesting. What does Temecula mean?
I think it's derived from an Indian name. I think it has something to do with the land of the morning mist or something like that. Yeah. But it's kind of cool. I grew up in that area. My brother, about 4.5 years older than I am though, but retired in that area. The Barnett family actually has a lot of history there. My grandmother, Isabel Barnett, was the first white woman born in the Temecula Valley, and
wow, cool.
they later named a school, Isabel Barnett Elementary School, after her. So it's kind of neat to have a lot of history in that area. And one of the homes she grew up in has been preserved there as a historical home. It's actually a shopping center a little bit north of downtown Temecula, but it's kind of neat to have that kind of history there.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you managed to escape going to combat, being a...
It is. Like I say, it was mainly because I was in Thailand for the year and then went straight to overseas for another 3 years. So, and of course, that was 66 to 69 was really a big part of the war in South Vietnam. That's when a lot of when our guys over there.
Yeah, Travis.
The thing about the F-100, I think, has been kind of neat. A guy by the name of Les Frazier in Texas started getting people together to flow in the F-100, and he called it the Super Saber Society. So rather than have reunions of just a wing or a unit or a squadron or something like that, he set up a group of anybody that ever flew the F-100, and I've heard anywhere from maybe 20 to 25,000 guys, or for a 20-year period from the mid-50s to the late 70s, maybe 25-year period. I mean, a lot of guys flew the F-100. So he set up this group to get together with just anybody that ever flew the F-100. So in 2007, we had our first reunion in Las Vegas at the Gold Coast Hotel, mainly as a follow-on to the F-86 guys, because the F-86 guys had their reunion over there every couple of years. So we made it a follow-on to have the F-100 at the same time. So it's been pretty cool. So I think
Didn't they have a reunion in Elmendorf recently?
Excuse me.
Not the F-100. Now, they may have had a splinter group of some kind, but the overall Super Saber.
Actually, well, you must have retired as Lieutenant Colonel. Then.
Yeah, I retired as Lieutenant Colonel. I was up for 06, but never did quite make it. So it was a good time to retire out of the IG team. And it's been, anyway, back to the Super Saber group. We get together every 2 years over in Las Vegas, and it's been really neat. There's about 5 or 6 guys I flew with in Lakenheath, or I got to know real well, and we've gotten together every couple of years over there and relived the times when we flew together. So it's been a great time. We had one reunion at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, I think in 2015, and that was pretty cool. They set it up for us right in in the museum, right next to the F-100 they have there, in fact, and under the wings of a big B-52. But otherwise, we've had all of our reunions in Las Vegas. But it's been pretty cool. Bob Hoover spoke to us several times. Bud Day spoke to us as part of our group. Those two gentlemen, unfortunately, both passed away since then. But I've had a chance to meet a lot of neat guys that way. There are still 2 F-100s actually flyable these days. A lot of people don't realize that. One of them, the Collins Foundation down in Ellington, Texas, they kept an airplane flyable. These are both 2-seat versions of the F-100F. But it flew in October this last year at their air show down there, the wings over Houston, and I went down there. My wife and I went down there to visit in May of last year, and then we got to see it fly this year. But they maintain it down there. They dedicated to Bud Day, who led the first Misty Squadron in South Vietnam, the forward air control squadron that was developed over there. Again, they used just a F model airplane where they could have a pilot both in the front seat and back seat, basically going out jinking, looking for anti-aircraft sites, and to take those out.
So you never worked with a forward air controller then, I guess?
No, I never did. No, I never did. During my time, yeah, I know in South Vietnam, of course, that's they had O2s and O1s and O2s, and I think OV10s, and then the F-100s with all the forward air controllers. I know most all the guys that flew missions down there obviously flew under the control of a forward air controller because they were close to troops in contact in a lot of cases, I know.
A Marine friend of mine who was on the ground in '68 and there for Tet, he said the airplane they always wanted to see up to help out was the F-100 because it was the most accurate.
Right.
So, but I guess going slowly.
The other F-100 is still around, I got to main, is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Cutter's his call sign, Dean Cutter, and Cutshon, I think is his name. But anyway, he's maintained this airplane for a good 20 years, and he does it at air shows.
Where does he get the money for the gas? Jesus.
Yeah, well, he charges. He's invited some of our Super Sabre guys to come back there and fly with him, and they only let us fly in the back seat. I have not done it myself, but several guys have. Last year, I think we had a weekend up there in Fort Wayne. I think Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think he flew 12 guys during that time, at least 2 a day, 2 or sometimes 3 a day. He'd take them up for about a half hour. But anyway, really pretty cool. And he charges $5,000 to do a flight, which seems like a lot, but it's a neat experience for guys that want to get back and be in the airplane again. And it's the only one really flying right now that I know of, outside the one down in Ellington. But there are two airplanes still flyable.
Yeah, the amount of fuel is just
outrageous.
You can fly a jet.
Yeah, I keep in parts, but he's got a couple of the good crew chiefs I know that worked with him many years there at Cutshon.
Well, thank you, sir. That was great. Good stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ron. It's been a good career, and of course I've volunteered here at the museum here for about over 10 years now, and it's always good to keep up in aviation and keep our hands in it. I'm the flight captain of our Dedangans group here now, and so aviation has been a good thing. I've had a chance to meet some of the astronauts that have been here. You mentioned Al Warden. I met him one time. Let's see, I think Gene Cernan, I know, was here one time. Several years ago I had a chance to meet him. And
we're running out of those guys.
Charlie Duke, that was the one I met. I escorted here last year, and that was really a neat experience to do that. He was on one of the few ones that was actually landed on the moon. The other time I helped, it just circled the moon. Cool magazine. I'll let you look at it. We put it 3 times a year at the intake. We call it. It's a Super Sabre Society organization that started about over 10 years ago, and they really put some great articles in here about it. Anyway, it's kind of cool.
I have a friend that's